Jimbo Zordan Himi Jan, Zone Molum, Jimbo Gabjata, Bakaratargon Santo Shermat, Tumba to Janla Kisham Zara on the general telling Jankam and Jawar Tuji Shanloy Jimmy Panzo Jala Sora and the Gonja Toban Bora Shinji Lo, Gonja Toban Bora Shinji, Gonja Toban Bora Shinji Lo, Shan Shan Shan, we may have Pechan and Chen and Zao. 我今将闻得书者，愿记如来真实义。为度化一切众生，请大家发布上殊胜的菩提心。执笔在那多牛毛热个，没那么利用拖杆、切杆拉，人真人吃那不贴个，我帮在为动。执上那的直击开始当。 Lava Kyonjang Tarzib Lasuk Nip Lansan Htan Metal Jole Marmam Jong Pama Givjo Tramsum Lasopa Mupkur Mochang Ambar La Namla Tot Tedr Zapshitum Tsun Nat Miki Le Tangbum Tsunji Karvam Jongsir Ne Murnam Pansan Tikjang Dangwa Le Sale Jevlang Tsunchi Rangjin Kir Chiki Chiksud Ganson Neston, Teni Napki Tepjan Cheverenger, Murnum, Lagma Miki Tsarmjente, Miki Tsarmjente, Kapse Tang, Kapse Vatan, Rikon Karpo Tang, Therma Varte, Priskum Barbe Don, Teni Pervi Rimba Tambana, Gazi. Liba Jongkir Gongwa Na Chiki Chimtong Gab Semtiete Chukchud Pambe Vedang Vamor Nam Nyeshi Varkir Mafshin Len Pambe Jibchi Varte Rimjin Duluk Tang Chama Ngankir Tsiktsiv Nafsim Tang Onusim Lukta Murug Dopa Tang Chakdang Lukpi Churnor Pamwa Yi Gyadang Nivgyar Ngavgya Tongdang ne, Nirtong, Nartong, Chidang, Nichidang, Jichi, Gachi, Varda, Compare Lo, Sevjin Zigdang, Longshut Possum, Pensong Per, Varku Namla, Murp Jerni te, Ya Togo, Ma Togo te, Ve Rangwa Yin. 好，今天。 我们讲那个，讲如意宝藏。
Let us begin our class on the wish-fulfilling treasury. After tomorrow, I will pause the class until I'm not quite sure yet. I think it's the 11th or the 10th on the Tibetan calendar. Maybe Sunday, maybe Monday. The 9th? Which day is it on the 9th? Saturday? Something like that. Either the 9th or the 10th.
10号是多少？可能礼拜天要上，但现在定上。
That is the Sunday. Maybe we will have the class. I'm not quite sure yet about it. We will see. Now let us begin our class.
这个五谷光尊者的如意宝藏论当中。
In the wish-fulfilling treasury, Longchenpa already talked about the formation of animate and inanimate world. Currently, he is teaching on the duration of the world, where we've already studied that in the formation stage there are it takes 20 medium kalpas, and 20 medium kalpas for duration, 20 medium kalpas for the degradation, 20 medium kalpas for the empty kalpa, altogether 80 medium kalpas. And the 80 medium kalpas with the formation, duration, degradation, and empty, that is one great kalpa. This time we are studying the outlook of the world from a Buddhist perspective. I think for many of you who studied following a completely different system that we've received from schools and from the educational system, I think our study this time definitely provides a very different perspective. Many of you consider the formation of our inanimate world and the beginning of the human beings are very different than what is taught in Buddhism. The sense of time, the sense of development, the sense of profundity of how the animate and inanimate world formed far surpass that of the anthropologists or the historians, and very different than what they had taught. And this different perspective is not unfounded or is not without any support or foundation. So after translating this text, I feel that it will bring some new inspiration to you, and it would help you to gain some different insights. Every day after my class, I would listen to your after-class discussion groups. When I listen into those discussion groups, I noticed there are a lot of heated discussions, and that is quite wonderful. Your longing for knowledge and your curiosity, it's quite wonderful to witness that. In the past few years, we've been taking turns to coming to the shrine hall to listen to the classes because of the pandemic. I think in the future it would be the best for all of you to come here and engage in the after-class discussions and post-class presentations. On top of that, I think it is quite good to have the tutoring classes, and if you have a little bit of pressure to study with a group, you will be able to learn more as well. Many of our Kumpos and Kummels are giving tutoring classes after my classes. But this time I haven't really asked who's giving the mentoring classes or how much of the depth that you're giving in the tutoring classes. But I think if you were to spend more time in this new knowledge, you would be able to develop a very different perspective, and you would be able to gain different insights. Yesterday we talked about how human lifespan declined from the infinite numbers of years to 80,000, and then from 80,000 to 10 years of age. And today we will continue to talk about after the human lifespan reaches to 10 years of age. What happens at that time is that, let it be economic development, let it be the cultural development, in all different aspects of human society, at that period of time, you can consider that's the lull of laws. At the time when human beings reach to that stage, over here in the verses it says that at the 10 years of age in lifespan, the human beings have great afflictions and dualistic thoughts. Their height is about one span between the thumb to the index finger and four fingertips. There are lots of heat during the day and coldness at night that harms them, and there is the all-pervasiveness of poverty. So At the beginning, the human beings have infinite numbers of lifespan, if you remember, and then slowly it increases to 10 years of age. Nowadays, we feel that 100 years is pretty good. Whenever we hear anyone who lived to 100 years of age, we feel that's really good. But around that time, when people have the average of lifetime of 10 years, then people would feel that if a person would live for 10 years, that is already a great achievement. Also, people at that time would have great afflictions and great dualistic thoughts. People's height is of there's one span between thumb to index finger. That is the average height. Or some of the taller ones would be of that height. Some of the shorter ones would only have the height of 4 fingers length, which is according to some other sutras or commentaries says it is also measured as a fist height. That is the lifespan and the height of human beings then. Also, the weather's condition. During the day, it is really hot, and at night, it's very cold. Sometimes we have that kind of weather in Tibet as well. The life situation is rather quite poor. There's all-pervasive poverty, lots of suffering, lots of harm that would torture human beings at the time. So, at that time, whenever there is a child that is born, everyone would make the wish that may you live till the year of 10, till the age of 10, just as how we would say that may you live till you're 100. But at that time, people would state their great wishes by saying that may you live for 10 years. Over here in Longchenpa's teaching, he says that the women at that time would get married at 5 years of age. But according to some sutras, it says that at the age of 5 months, the women would get married. That is according to the Medium Agama Sutra and the Agana Sutra. Well, 5 years is equivalent to 50 years of age, meaning women would get married at 50 years of age in our time, because we have 100 years of lifespan right now, right? So, not quite sure if Longchenpa over here made a typo, or not sure if it's correct. If it is 5 months, then it is about 15 or 16 years of age in proportion to when human lifespan is about 100. The Africans, their average time of getting married is a bit different. Some of the countries have the custom of marrying the girls at the age of 12 and 13. Some of them, I've heard that some children, for example, they are still children themselves at 8 years of age, and they already are married and with children. So the situation in Africa is very much out of our radar, and it's very surprising, sounds quite surprising to us. In countries such as Malawi and Lesotho, these countries, the average lifespan of people living there is about 35 or 45. Yesterday, during the after-class tutoring session, someone said that the human lifespan should be much longer nowadays than it used to be because our medical support and people's health is getting better, so the average lifespan is about 80 to 90 years of age. But that is not true. If you can look online, if you can Google it, in the past past few years, the average lifespan of the Chinese is about 70 years. And then in Africa, out of the 52 or 53 countries, also in India and Nepal, in many of the places, their average lifespan is rather very low. Of course, there are exceptions such as Japan, Canada, and America. Those kind of developed countries, the average is about above 80. But altogether, if we were to average all the human lifespan in our world right now, it won't exceed 70 years of age. When we look at the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, that was about 2,500 years ago. So each of the 100 year would decrease for 1 year of average lifespan. That would be then 25 years deducted from 100. So now the average lifespan is about 75 years of age. From this angle, then it is correct. Nowadays, whenever we look at it from the medical point of view or other point of view, I believe back in 2005 or something like that, the average lifespan is about 78 or 70 something. Of course, there are fluctuation of different circumstances, but I think what is expounded in the sutra is rather from a very macro point of view of talking from a macro perspective. If we were to decrease 1 year per every 100 years, then it is actually quite easy to calculate it. After 2,000 or 3,000 or 10,000 of years, we will eventually decrease to the human beings will eventually decrease to the lifespan of 10 years of age. It would be easy to calculate it. Over here, it also talks about the height of the average human beings at that time. Also, in terms of the food, at that time, the best meal, the most delicious food that people will be able to enjoy is what we considered as a type of grain that tastes a little bit bitter. Nowadays, we consider this particular grain as being harmful because it is harmful to the crops. It is a little bit purplish on the tip. It looks kind of like barley or wheat. So this particular type of grain is considered as the most delicious food. Also, the best type of clothing that people would be able to wear at that time is made of human hair. That is why it is said that even the monastic robes would be able to be dyed with the appropriate color, because at that time the human hair is rather quite rough, and the clothing that it could weave would be also rough, and it is unable to be dyed. The best decoration is weapon. Because of the degeneration of the time and of the humanity, people would wear weapons at all times. And it is said that the bees do not produce honey anymore. Out of milk, you will no longer be able to make the clarified butter anymore. Out of the sesame seeds and the other seeds, you will no longer be able to get oil. Like canola seeds and so on, you will no longer be able to get oil anymore. Also, you will no longer be able to get sugar out of sugar cane. So out of the 6 types of flavor, the sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and savory, as well as the rough taste, you will only be able to taste the rough taste. There is no other taste available anymore. Everything else would disappear. Also, there would be no salt available. For Tibetans, as Tibetans, we really enjoy the flavor of salt. We would add some salt in our tsampa, in the tea even. When I was having dinner earlier, I thought that, well, if there is no salt and no sugar, then there is really no flavor to anything. That would be quite sad. Indeed, the world at that time, everything would degrade. According to the Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, it says that there are the three degradations during that time. One is the lifespan, and the other one is relying on the teacher or relying on faith. The other one is the degradation of provisions. So the degradation in terms of food and in terms of clothing and so on. The crops will no longer be able to ripe and produce all the different types of flavors that we enjoy nowadays. And because of the degradation of a human being's merit, the provisions no longer would be available. So in general, that situation during that time is quite difficult to live in. There's lots of calamity, natural calamity, the drought, and so on. Though that our particular time is not the time like that, but we still see some similar calamities. Currently in China, in the northeast area, there is drought going on, but in the southern part, there is a flood. Sometimes in very close by provinces, we see that at one particular province, flooding would result to lots of deaths, and the neighboring province would suffer from drought. All of these are the result of the non-virtuous deeds that we've committed. In the auto commentary, rather sometimes we see the commentary that is composed around the similar part that explains the verses, and sometimes there is the explanation given before the actual verses. Sometimes it's given after the actual verses. In Tibet, we have different ways of explaining it. Sometimes we call it the pre-commentary, sometimes it's the post-commentary. And then in the verse it says that a good crop's missing, only left with food, matures in 60 days. Blankets, carpets, and brocades drop out of sight. The salt is nowhere to be seen. Also, out of the milk, there is no longer any clarified butter. People no longer respect one's parents and relatives, rather would slander them. The Shramanas would praise only of the vicious beings. At that time, at the time of human beings only have the 10 years of average lifespan, all the good crops and good grains such as rice, barley, oats, and wheat, all of those, including all kinds of beans and peas and all the great fruits, would all disappear. There would be no apples, pears, and mustard seeds or of the sugar cane. There would be no longer crops, no longer of any of those crops could be found. The only crop that can be harvested at that time is a type of bitter buckwheat. It's called Treasury buckwheat. Maybe it's difficult for you to imagine it, but let's take Africa as an example right now. The 80 to 90% of the crops that Africans would be able to harvest is corn. I've been there, and when I asked many people, even some of them are considered much wealthier than the others, what constitutes the majority of their meal is corn porridge. When we think of the great African continent, we imagine that on such a large field, they should be able to harvest a variety of crops, isn't it? But because of the different weather and the special conditions over there, even when I was looking down at the continent from the airplane, I see there's a special haze hovering over the land. So it's quite interesting how that special situation civilization in Africa resulted in the special crops that could only be harvested as corn. I've been to 7 or 8 countries in Africa in my 2 times of visiting in the African continent. Whichever country I've been to, I've heard many stories of killing of the wild animals such as elephant, and of course nowadays they're protecting it. Also, there were such struggles between the Africans with the countries that colonized them, such as the Netherlands and England and so on. Each of them would fight for benefit, to gain benefit from this continent for hundreds of years, and I'm sure you're quite aware of that particular history. In general, we can look at the people living in that area. Each of the household would eat corn as their main food source. If you don't believe in the kalpa that suffers or the calamity of famine in the future kalpas, if you do not believe in the pretas, if you do not believe in all of these, then you should visit it, because of course to them it is not a very respectful language to be spoken, but indeed when you make such observation, I think it's easy for you to generate compassion, and the compassion would naturally arise. Therefore, if my age permits, if the conditions permits, I would love to stay there again. I remember that I visited a factory in Africa that's owned by Chinese. Some workers over there said that a young lady who was her employee died in the morning, and then she said that 2 days prior to her death, someone from her family died because of malnutrition, and then this morning she died as well. So, and then she was quite sad. She was quite saddened, and I saw tears in her eyes. But those, on one hand, it's very sad, but on the other, it feels that they're very used to those kinds of situations. All of those you won't be able to understand. So those are situations that you can only gain a better and deeper understanding once you're there. Now, at that time, other than the Treasury buckwheat, people don't really have any other things to eat. There are different translations. Some translate it as barn grass, but according to this particular translation, it is Treasury buckwheat. Also, people at that time no longer would be able to wear all the soft and gentle and beautiful clothing that is adorned with tassels or with brocade, all kinds of different types of clothing that we have nowadays. And all of such kind of result are a product of the collective karma of the sentient beings. On top of that, there is no longer the taste of salt. There is no longer ghee and butter. Also, the people at that time do not respect their parents. There is no filial piety. Rather, they would slander and be very harmful to their parents. The gurus and Brahmins, the Shramanas, that's considered as the ones with great spirituality. Even those beings at that time, they would praise the beings that creates non-virtuous deeds, rather very vicious deeds, such as killing and sexual misconduct and stealing. All of those. According to the Langagama Sutra, it says that since people at that time would practice the 10 non-virtuous deeds, and all of the Shramanas and Brahmins at that time would praise such kind of people, which is completely different than what we have as a moral, as what we consider as moral values. Nowadays, we would consider that not stealing, not killing, and respect and pay filial piety and gratitude to one's parents would be considered as praiseworthy. But at that time, people would no longer do so. So it really reflects at a certain periods of time, the policies, the moral values would be also altered and changed. In this way, we can also make the observation of what our society is. If the majority of people in society would praise all the beings practice virtuous deeds, then we would be able to see that the whole era or the whole atmosphere of the society would be rather very positive. Otherwise, it would be very negative. And that would be a sign of the decrease of human merits. As we know, when there is a decline of merits, then naturally all kinds of negative and unpleasant things would naturally occur. Also, after a long period of time, for human beings to have the lifespan for only 10 years, it didn't really specify how long that would last. But Longchenpa said that this kind of period would last for a long period of time. And then the three great calamities, the calamity of war, of famine, of pestilence, would then occur. According to some sutras, it is stated as the three calamities. In Abhidharma, there is one particular chapter on the three types of calamities. At that time, a great numbers of beings would die. Only about 10,000 people would survive because some of the celestial beings that would protect the virtuous deeds, the virtuous dharma, they would protect this group of beings. So the 10,000 people would slowly proliferate the human race. Now let's look at the next verse. War, famine, and pestilence that destroys all. At the beginning, the calamity of war wages fight among its people. Whatever is picked up turns into weapons, slaughtering each other, resulted in falling into lower realms. Now, Longchenpa over here states that the three calamities happens at the time when humans have the lifespan of 10 years of age, or have the lifespan of 10 years in average. But according to Yogacara Bhumi Shastra, it says that it is around the lifespan of 30 and 20 and then 10 years. The meaning could be similar because Longchenpa probably also quoted from Yogacara Bhumi Shastra. When we study the teachings on the animate and inanimate world, it is very difficult to find any other sutras or shastras that condense all the teachings in one text. When we study, for example, the Mahavibhasha Shastra, the Abhidharma, and the various texts that talks about such formations of animate and inanimate worlds, we have such a short life, and it's very difficult to study all of the others. But now you have the opportunity to study the wish-fulfilling treasury. You will be able to understand the gist of, or the framework of all the animate and inanimate world. At the beginning, I made the aspiration to only translate the 7 treasuries. I thought it would be really quite wonderful to finish translating all of that in such a short lifetime. While I was translating the wish-fulfilling treasury, I couldn't help but wanting to give the teaching of this text to all of you, because I feel that without me teaching it, many of you will not even read it. For example, after I finished translating the clear words, the Shastra on the clear words, as well as the entering the way of, or the gateway to knowledge, All of those shastras have their particular characters, have their particular specialties, but it is very difficult for many of you to understand it. Therefore, I had the thought to give the teaching on wish-fulfilling treasury. Initially, I had the other plans, but I thought it would be a great opportunity for you to study it and then gain a great understanding of the framework of Buddhism. If you were to understand the framework of Buddhism, then you can start to give teachings to the others as well. You will be able to give teachings to the others. That is based on if you've already given up any of the longing to have the worldly gains, if you've already eradicated all the 8 worldly dharmas and wanting to gain benefits or wanting to have any fame, then you can start to teach others. As long as you're not teaching for fame, for wealth, for your own happiness, as long as you have a pure intention to benefit the others, then it would be really wonderful for you to spread the Dharma. I probably shouldn't speak too much on this, otherwise I won't be able to finish teaching today. Anyhow, earlier we've already stated that at the time of human lifespan of 10 years, there are the 3 calamities. The first one is the war calamity, and the second one is pestilence, and then the last one is famine. In fact, when it comes to the calamity of famine, there are the 2 particular types. One is famine with pandemic, and the other one is famine with destitute. At the time of calamity of war, people at that time naturally would practice the non-virtuous deeds because in their mind stream there is the natural reason of aggression, of harming the others, and kept on wanting to hurt each other. So this mind is quite prevalent in hunters, for example. I remember that I know a person whose name is Gongchu Sampo. I knew him for many years, especially during the time of herding. When we were herding together, though he did not carry, sometimes he carries a gun, a hunting gun, sometimes he doesn't carry that, but when we were herding the yaks, sometimes he would carry a cane, and whenever we see a rabbit or some other kinds of small animal, he would have the urge to hit the other animals with his cane. In the Agana Sutra, there's also an example given, talks about such kind of urge of hurting others. Nowadays, whenever we see people and animals, we would naturally generate a sense of kindness. But maybe because over here we have that kind of habitual tendencies. Of course, there are people who don't want to talk to people, who don't want to talk to the others, who dislike the others naturally as well. Anyhow, after reaching to that calamity of war period, whatever you would pick up from the ground, let it be wood or rock or even earth, would become weapons. Even if it's a leaf, a tree leaf, at the time of holding onto it, it would become a knife that would carve the other's body. Also, out of the common and collective karma of the sentient beings, whatever things you see, whatever things you pick up would become a weapon that would be able to kill each other. That is why people at that time would all fall into hell realm. So the hell realm means the population of a hell realm beings would be extremely abundant. The kind of a harmful mind people have sometimes is to even families and the parents and family members, also spouses, and whenever they see each other, they would kill each other just like killing the enemies, which is quite unfathomable for us. But according to some of the sutras, it is says that at that time, all the beings would kill each other within 7 days of time. That is during that period of time, during the calamity of war. This is the first one. And the second one is the famine and the pandemic calamity. Over here it says that after that, people would get ill and would die because of that, because of the great numbers of non-virtuous deeds that people had conducted, which then created lots of wrath within the Asuras and the non-humans. So a variety of pandemic of pestilence would start to spread in human realm. The non-humans sometimes are the ones that would take the human being's essence. The pandemic that we are experiencing currently, when we look at it, has already taken the life of many people. And we can see it is because of the reasons of the human beings had conducted lots of non-virtuous deeds, which angered the Asuras and many other sentient beings. Because it has angered so many different sentient beings, the human beings started to get all kinds of illness. In the past over 2 years after the COVID-19 had broke out, along with other kinds of illness that is spreading around, and a great numbers of varieties of the virus. Even till now, we have not found a good medicine that would be able to cure the COVID-19. Though that we have the vaccine, but we know that there is really nothing else that could stop it yet. There's a saying that if the gods wanting to destroy a person, then the first step is to make that person crazy. After making that person crazy, then such an insane person would start to create all kinds of ill deeds. After they created the ill deeds, then the gods or the Asuras or the non-humans would be able to punish such kind of person. One of the ways of punishing people is to spread illness. According to some sutras, it says that it is during the time of when human lifespan is around 20 years, and the length of such a pandemic would last for 7 months and 7 days, which doesn't sound very long. Now, after the calamity of war and the calamity of pestilence, the rest of the people who survived through those two calamities then they have to endure through the calamity of famine and hunger. The situation is extremely sad. Let's look at it. It says that the rest of the human beings suffer from the calamity of famine. There are the three types: the cascade, skeleton, and wood sticks. The sentient beings suffer from grave hunger and thirst. After the two calamities, the rest of people their life would be ended by hunger and famine. The reason of the calamity of famine is because of the great numbers of non-virtuous deeds that's practiced by human beings, which angers the Nagas. Some of the calamities are created, or their source is because of the anger of the Nagas, some because of the Asuras. When the Nagas are wrathful, then they start to rain. They start to cause rain, which then would cause flood or drought. In such a way, the crops won't be able to grow, which resulted in the third calamity, which is the calamity of famine. So the first calamity of hunger and famine is a cascade calamity of famine. The second one is of skeleton calamity of famine, and the third one is wood stick calamity of famine. Why the casket? It is a small box, the casket. It means that at the time, prior to the human lifespan of 30 or of 10 years of age, maybe around the human lifespan of 30 or 40 years of age, there are some grains that's still left from their time. For that reason, the human beings, because they no longer have barley or rice or pea, they had barely anything left. So the previously left and kept grain are considered as quite precious, so they would keep them in a small casket to preserve. The rice that we have, look at us, we have a variety of rice. The Thailand rice, the northeastern rice in China, though that in Sichuan province we don't have the best rice. But for the barleys, we have really good barleys. There are the green barley, the white barley, the black barley. Some said that the black ones taste better, some said the white ones taste better, and some said that the yellow greenish colored barley tastes the best. But we still have a variety of these kinds of harvests. However, at the time of the 10 years of lifespan, it is quite rare to see even one grain of rice or one grain of barley. Therefore, people would keep them in a small casket. Whenever people at the time of at the brink of death from hunger, people would boil that tiny grain of rice in water, and then they would be able to eat it, which could help them to regain their strength. Due to the prevalent lack of food and malnutrition, after people fall down, it would be difficult for them to stand back up again, and no one else would help them to get up, and people would die after falling down. That is a particular type of the calamity of famine, which is a casket calamity of famine. The second type of calamity of famine is skeleton calamity of famine. It is named so because the previous human beings that died already and their skeletons are left. During that period of time of when human beings have only 10 years of lifespan, the previous generation's skeleton would be sold in markets, on streets, and some people would dig them out from the graveyards. Or people would go to the butcher's places and try to find some skeletons. And they would pick those and get those skeletons and boil them into a soup. Such kind of broth is considered to be more nutritious than any other meal that they could get at the time. When I was little, since we also had very little food available, of course we don't make a broth out of skeletons, but we would reuse the bones of the yak meat. After, for example, after eating the yak's meat, that we would then boil the bones. Especially after a great snow, we would put all the bones in a pot and boil it into a broth. The broth tastes really good and nutritious.
就人们也是那个啊，就是就那个时候的话呢，就是以前的一些老人的这个故事当中的话，
At the time of when human beings
比如
reached
说他
10
们
years
如果在
of
挖地啊，
age,
就是在哪里呢？就是
the
找到一
seniors
个
at
就
that
是
time
向我们
would
人头
keep
拜
the
谢的，就是
would
人头
tell the
是谁的，那
stories
个时候的人的一
how
个故土找到的话呢，他
the
们信息
previous
不换
generation
信
of
息
human
然后
beings
呢，就是他们会觉得
has
说
the
啊，这个是
lifespan had the
这个
lifespan
是
of
人数多
100
少多
years
少
of
岁的
age
时候
or
的故土
50
应该
years
是
of
里面有
age.
很大的这个营养。然后呢，马
Therefore,
上
when
马
people
上那个
found
故土
the
烫死，这样的话
skeleton
呢，
of the
而且他们
previous
也延长很长时
generations
间的
of
这个生
human
命。那
beings,
个
they
时候的
would
人
be
的这种
extremely
计
happy. They
划的
would
话
talk
呢，就是
about,
真的
oh,
让人
this is
觉
the
得就
human
最后
being
晕倒，就特别特别
that
的这个
lived at the
可怜。
beginning of
其
the
实我们
kalpa, and
就是
they
现在
lived for so
在
and so
在座的
years.
各位的
So
话呢，
this
就是
bone
我
has
们是不是也
great
是像我们这里
amount
可
of
能有一些
nutrition. We should
老
make a
菩萨
broth
们
out
就
of
是以
it
前
so
就
that
是
we can
实
have
现过的
also
一
a
个
long
计划
period of
60年的，
time
其实
to
那个
live
时候
as well.
只有1年多的时间呢，啊，就是
I remember that
3年吗？
back in the 60s, there's also a great famine. Was it 1 year or 3 years?
3年，
3 years.
我是刚刚计划
Maybe some of
结束
our
以后
senior
就才来到
practitioners
这个
also
世界
went
的。
through that famine around that time. I came
然后
into
计
this
划的
world
计划的
after,
那
right
那个
after
1
the
年当中
famine.
的话呢，我们整个这个洛库马的是没有
In
这
my
个生育
hometown,
任何的，所以我上面就是我是属虎的
there
嘛，就是在
were
上面的
no
2、3
newborns
年当中就是
during
没有
the
这个找
famine
到这个这个
for
结晶，
about 1 or 2
全
years.
部都是那个时候人
So
都没有什么
I
生育
couldn't
的
find
营养的，
any
所以说
anyone older than
3
me in
年
my
也可以说，
hometown.
但是
There's no
这个
one
说法
that's
都
about
各
2 or 3
种各样
years
的，
older
各种
than
各样
me
的这个说
around
法，
that
反正是这个
around
有
that region at the time, because at that
自
time,
然灾害的
out
也
of
有各种
famine,
说法的。
there's no
但是那个
newborns.
饥荒就是这样的，就是它叫做是这个叫做是败鬼
Anyhow,
基金啊，
that
就是败
is
鬼基金。
the
所以呢，
calamity of hunger,
其实
calamity
人那
of
个
famine,
就是
the
这种
skeleton
就饥荒的
calamity
时候
of
呢，当
famine.
时我母亲的时候
During
看到
the
过那边
famine,
一个商务就是枪毙了2个人说的，一个叫阿西什么这个尼玛这样子，一个叫做伊洛多顿，就是2个人枪毙了。
during
然后
the
到了下午的
famine's
时候呢，
time,
就是他
my
这个大
mother
队里
told
面
me
的
that
肉全部已经这个就是
2 people were
就没有了，说的就是那个时候
executed
一般
in the
藏族人是
morning.
对吃麻肉很
After
很
they
忌讳
were
的，就是麻
executed
肉
in the
但
afternoon,
那个
the
时候的话呢，如果死了一
flesh
个人，
on
大家
their
都是
thighs
就
were
吃
carved
死了一匹
away.
马的话呢，就是大家都特别
Usually,
关心
the
马上就抢着
Tibetans
吃麻肉，就是所以说
really
那个时候的
dislike
话呢，就有
eating
很多的
the
这种
flesh of
故事
horse
就
or
是很
dogs.
多
But
很多的
even
故
at
事。
that time,
然后在下面的
eating
话
the
呢，就
flesh
是
of
叫那个
human
木
were
木条基金呢，
no
木条基
longer
金的话
being
呢，
scolded
因为人们
anymore,
呢，就是以
and
前的
people
是
would
有一些
eat
那
the
个
flesh of
就是
horse
巫
or
啊，就是包括
flesh
有
of
些
the
青
other
稞麦子啊，
animals.
就是这些呢，
So
就是有些
there were
有
lots
有
of
说法不
stories
同
like
吧，有
such.
些前
The
人呢，就
next
是放
one
在那个什
is
么这个箱子
the
里啊，就是有些藏在那个粮
wood
粮
stick
仓里面的。这
famine,
个时候
wood
呢，那
stick
些人的
calamity
话
of
呢，就是
famine.
用那个木块，就是开
Since
始
the
那个
previous people,
把
the
它挖
previous
出来，
generation
挖
of
出来，
human
如果找
beings
到1、2个这
grew
个粮
lots
仓的话
of
呢，他们都
grains,
非常欢
including
喜，就是
barley
然后
and
呢，
wheat
就是
and
开始
so on
就
and
在
so
这个水
forth.
里面熬，
So
就是
the
这样的。
previous
还
generation
有这
would
是一种说法，
hide
如果
those
我
kinds
们
of
这个吴光中在这里说法的话呢，意思是
food
他们
in
就是如果就是用
in
这
a
个木
box
条来，就是
or
能照
sometimes
到就
in a
是
barn.
烧素
And
的这
then
些粮食的话呢，
the
就是用
later
这个放在水里
generation
面，就是让
living
把它
at the
就是
time of
就
when
熟
human
起
beings
来，
had
然
only
后
10
就这
years
个呢
of
就是去吃。
lifespan
所以我们
would
以
start to
前那个
look
藏
for
民的话
them
呢，就是
with
把
wood
筷子
sticks.
就是很忌
Sometimes
讳，就
they
是说
would
是
be able to
这个
find
是
1 or 2
什么那个
little
木条基金的一个
grains
象征，
of
就是然后
food. They
拿
would be
筷子出
extremely
来，
happy and they
因为
start to
拿筷
boil
子
it
是
in
那
the
个木
water.
条，就开始挑这个
In
菜
such a
的，
way,
所
the
以
wood
所以这个
sticks
是饥
are
荒的一个
similar
象
to the
征，就是
chopsticks that
然
we
后
use. That
现
is
在
why
的
in
话好像这
Tibet, in the
个
past, even the
都这
seniors
个观
would
念就是
consider
老
that
年人
using
都拿筷
chopsticks
子
to eat
你看
is
刚
a
开始以前藏
sign
地寺就是
an
只有一个
omen
扫，这个是
for
怎么样的，一
the
般不会用
wood
筷子，
stick
然后别人要用
calamity
筷子
of
的时候，很多
famine.
老年人都开始
But
说
nowadays,
那
of
个笑
course,
话，
it
就
is
是现
no
在是不是已
longer
经到了这个最人
spoken
数
of
10岁的饥
very
荒期了，你
often.
不要用
But
短
in
信
the
用筷
past, the seniors would be
现在还没有到
extremely
这个时间，
unhappy when
所以说
when we would use chopstick, we would only use a spoon or things like that in Tibet, but we don't use chopsticks. Anyhow, at the time of the wood stick calamity of famine, there would be no crops and grains available anymore. People would eat the skin of tree or sometimes eating soil. In China mainland, there's a particular soil that would fill up one's stomach and stop the sensation of hunger. But after eating it, people would die from indigestion. There's another type of soil that could be eaten in Africa. They would make little pancakes out of it, and that is digestible and would be able to maintain one's life for a short period of time. But even till now, even when we look at our time, every year there are thousands of children and people would die from malnutrition and from the reasons of famine. That is in our world. We have not reached to the time of when the human lifespan is in the average of 10 years. So we have never encountered such severe calamity of famine yet. Though it is difficult to say what's going to happen in the future, because nowadays, because of the war between countries that export lots of crops, it would then result to the lack of a harvest of crops for years. In this way, we have to be very careful with our food. We have to save and we have to be very mindful of cherishing the meals that we have, the food that we have. Anyhow, I understand that some of our fellow Sangha members, after having such kind of insight, they bought kilos of rice, but rice doesn't really keep long. Barleys in Tibet would keep for a long period of time and won't go expired, but rice would. In this way, you're really wasting a lot of food. So you have to be very skillful when it comes to storage some extra food. We should be prepared, but also we should be careful. Previously, we talked about how the sentient beings living during the time of calamity of war, since they killed each other out of anger, therefore a majority of them would take rebirth in hell realm. And during the calamity of pestilence, the majority of them would take rebirth in celestial realms since they didn't die from aggression. And then during the time of calamity of famine, since the beings at that time would harbor a sense of stinginess, they would hide their own, they would protect their own food and even steal the other's food. For such a reason, majority of them would take rebirth in the Preta, the hungry ghost realm. When we look at the sentient beings lived during the time of the casket calamity of famine, they would protect their own food in small boxes, just like how the wealthy man nowadays would save their money in banks, but nobody else knows their password. So out of stinginess, they would die and take rebirth in hungry ghost realm. Also, on top of that, there's the wood stick calamity of famine, and then the skeleton as well. So people would die for similar reasons. Then that would last for a long period of time, 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days, according to the Yoga-Charya Bhumi Shastra, which is a bit different than the Longchenpa's statement and teaching. In the Shastra, it says that at the time of 30 years of age, 30 years of lifespan, there would be the calamity of famine, and at the 20, the calamity of pestilence, and then at the lifespan of 10 years, then there's the calamity of war. Also, at the time that in Jambudvipa, the human beings are suffering from the 3 calamities, there's the similar calamities that's happening in the west and the east continents, the Purvavidiha and the Aparagodania continents. But the way that they suffer at that time are less intense than that of the Jambuvipa human beings, because the negative karma and the aspiration of creating those negative karmas are much less intense. However, in Uttarakuru, the northern continents, the beings would not suffer from the three calamities, because it is more of a continent that the human beings would reap the virtuous fruition of their past deeds. According to the Mahavibhasha Shastra, it states that if we were to observe the precepts of not killing for 1 day and 1 night, we will no longer be born in the calamity. We will not be born during the time of calamity of war. If we were to make offering of medicine to the Sangha, we will not take rebirth in the calamity of pestilence. And if we were to make offering of food to the Sangha, then we will not take rebirth during the time of calamity of famine and hunger. So we should try our best to observe precepts such as not killing and so on. On top of that, we need to make offering to the Sangha, especially during the Ulambana Dharma Assembly, or make offering to the Sanghas whenever possible. Even if it's a little bit, the merit is great. I've stated before that if you want to make offering to the Guru, of course you can make such offerings if the Guru is a perfect Guru, or a Guru that observes all the virtuous signs or meet all the requirements. But if the Guru doesn't meet all the requirements of being a Guru, then it would be the best to make offering to the Sangha. Since sometimes the Sanghas, when we look at them, some of the young novice may look very naughty rather, but as a group, after wearing such monastic robes and upholding the various kinds of vows, for those reasons, if we were to make offerings to them, such kind of merit would be able to annul the calamities in our future. Another key to avert all kinds of calamities that happens in the world, such as famine and war and so on, it is crucial for us to practice the 10 virtuous deeds, to make aspirations, to make prayers, and to make offerings, to also chant sutras, and to practice as much virtue as possible. In this way, it would be very helpful, though that lots of the calamities are said to happen since it has already been matured. But there are still lots of things that could be changed. Now let's still get into a little bit of the increased kalpa. Otherwise, it's not very auspicious.
下面我们讲到那个第二个道理，就是那个戒所证，就是增戒的道理啊。
Now the second
戒所增戒上面的这个
that talks about the increased kalpa.
这个斋戒啊，就是3个斋戒已经结束以后的话，
We already covered the 3 calamities. After the 3 calamities time has come to an end, then again, let's talk about the increased kalpa, which happens stage by stage. Previously, we've already stated that there is the calamity of hunger, famine, of war. It is almost similar to after a great calamity of, for example, earthquake. Only a few people would survive, who are protected by the celestial beings, since they've practiced the virtuous deeds in their past life. After they survived and lived in secluded areas such as islands or in caves, And then once they meet the other human beings, they would be extremely happy to see each other, and they would feel quite rare that they've seen someone else that is alive. So they would gather together and they would talk about the kalpa of hunger and famine and war and pestilence, which lead them to recognize the cause of such is the non-virtuous deeds. At that time, I don't think there are people who's giving teachings to them on the non-virtuous deeds lead to non-virtuous fruition, but they recognize that. Indeed, the merits of human beings are like such. With the degradation of the morals of the society, the moral values of human beings would also degrade, and people would consider creating evil deeds or making evil actions would be wonderful for them, would benefit them. In some of the places it happens like that. It is happening right now. Anyhow, at that time, then a manifestation of material bodhisattva would manifest in their group. There are people, so this particular manifestation would have beautiful and a magnificent appearance, and he looks very different. For such a reason, people at that time would start to question, why do you look so healthy, so magnificent, and what should we do so that we can be also like you? This manifestation stated that it is because I don't kill, because I do not create the evil deeds. That is why I gained this magnificent appearance. For that reason, people started to get healthier because they started to practice the virtuous deeds, and they started to get stronger, and they started to accumulate more merit in such a way. The lifespan would slowly to increase. Since the human beings, after reaching almost 20 years of lifespan, with another manifestation of material bodhisattva, whom given them the precept of no killing, the lifespan would further increase further and further. So for example, the parents are 20, then the children would live for 40 years, which is quite hopeful. We've already covered these two verses where it says that after taking the vow from abstaining from killing, the children at that time would live for 20 years, and then they would stop stealing, which would lead to the lifespan of 40. So it takes stages and stages. At that time, people would abstain from sexual misconduct. Then lying and discursive and frivolous speech were abstained as well. After that, aggression, greed, and wrong view are abstained. So at that time, the manifestation of material bodhisattva appeared again. Slowly give them teaching stages by stages and step by step. So according to Long Agama Sutra, it says that the increase of the lifespan by the stages are much faster. So previously we studied that at the time of a human span of 10 years, after taking the vow of abstaining from killing, their lifespan would increase to 20 years. And then when the parents are 20 years of have the 20 years of lifespan, since the children took the vow that abstains from stealing, then they would live for 40 years. And then as parents, they live for 40 years. The children abstain from sexual misconduct, and therefore they live for 80 years. And then that doubled again to 160 years from abstaining from lying, which then the life doubles from abstaining from the speech of schism to 320 years. And at the 320 years after abstaining from coarse language, people would be able to live for 640 years. At the time of human beings living for 2,000 of years, because of abstaining from greed, the children would be able to live for 5,000, and at the time of the parents would live for 5,000. Since the children abstained from anger, they lived for 10,000 of years. And after abstaining from wrong view, the children lived for 20,000 years. After abstaining from the 4 types of unreasonable desire or 4 types of graspings, then they would be able to live for 40,000 of years. And after that, when the children started to pay filial piety and respected their parents, showed gratitude to the seniors as well as Brahmins and Shamanas, then their lifespan increased to 80,000 of years. That is stated in, I think the Long Agama Sutra is a little bit different. It states that the increase is a bit slower, but over here it says that the increment of lifespan is much faster. According to Longchenpa, the lifespan of human beings increased from 100 to 200 to 500, 1,000, 2,000 to 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 to 80,000, and then that are the results from creating the 10, practicing the 10 virtuous deeds. That is how the lifespan increased in 2 folds. So over here it says that between the 10 years of lifespan to 80,000 years of lifespan, it only took the human beings 12 generations. But of course, when we look at the 12 generations for human beings living for 100 years per generation versus the 2 folds of lifetime per the previous generation, the overall time is much longer. The increment between 10 years of lifespan to 80,000 took 12 generations, but the decline also took 12 generations as well. As in this teaching, we would be able to see that the practice of 10 virtuous deeds is indeed crucial, because the increment of the numbers of years of lifespan, as well as the height of the body and the provisions, including the food, wealth, clothing, and all kinds of things, would also increase in 2 folds, and sometimes probably more than 2 folds. Sometimes the lifespan would increase directly from 640 to 2,000. So out of the 12 generations, in just as short as 12 generations, the human lifespan increased from 10 years of lifespan to 80,000 years of lifespan, and then decreased from 80,000 to 10 years again. We can see that the whole process is rather quite simple to understand. Some of the descriptions are a little bit different, but when you read into it, it should be rather quite clear through the analysis and commentary. Now, I think we should end here at the time of increase to 80,000 years of lifespan.